I was 23 years old in June of 1944, and by then I already knew one hard truth. Fear doesn't show up all at once. It creeps in quietly, usually when something feels just a little off, and nobody wants to be the first to say it out loud. We were somewhere inland from the Normandy coast, a few days after the landings. The maps said hedgerows and farm paths. The briefing said light resistance. What none of it mentioned was how fast a bad decision could turn a quiet march into a slow walk toward death. That morning, my hands wouldn't stop shaking, not from cold, from the waiting for orders, waiting for contact, waiting for the first shot that would tell us whether today was the day we'd run out of luck. I'd already seen enough bodies on the beaches to know luck was a real thing, and it didn't last forever. We were told we had a guide, a local, someone who knew the back roads, the sunken lanes, the fields the Germans supposedly ignored. Command said he'd get us through faster, cleaner, less exposure, less noise. That word, less, was doing a lot of work. I remember thinking how strange it was to trust a man we couldn't even properly question. He spoke just enough English to nod and point. He kept his eyes down. He walked too fast, like he wanted to be somewhere else. Every instinct I had was scratching at the back of my skull, telling me something wasn't right. But instincts don't outrank orders. The hedgerows closed in around us as we moved, thick, wet earth, the smell of manure and crushed leaves, boots sinking just enough to slow you down, rifles held tight, fingers riding triggers. Nobody talked. You don't talk when you're trying not to die. I kept thinking about how training never covered this part, the moments before everything goes wrong, when nothing has happened yet but you can feel it coming, like the air itself is holding its breath. If we'd turned around then, if someone had spoken up, things might have ended differently. Instead, we followed that guide deeper into Normandy, convinced we were taking the smart route. By the time we realized our mistake, it was already too late to fix it. By then I was a rifleman with an infantry platoon pushing inland with the US Army. We'd come off the beaches filthy, half-deaf, and running on whatever sleep we could steal, leaning against a hedgerow or the side of a ruined barn. Normandy wasn't the open country the maps showed back in England. It was tight, choked, every field boxed in by thick walls of earth and roots that could hide a whole squad if you didn't know what you were looking at. Our days followed a rhythm you learned fast or didn't live long. Wake before dawn. Check weapons, pass around cold rations, wait for orders, move, stop, listen, move again. Nights were worse, damp, quiet, broken by the sound of distant artillery and the occasional scream of livestock that had no idea a war had moved into its pasture. My immediate superior was a staff sergeant who'd been in North Africa and Sicily. He didn't waste words. If he told you to get down, you got down. If he told you to move, you moved. The first rule he drilled into us was simple. Never assume the ground ahead is empty just because it looks peaceful. In Normandy, peaceful was a lie the land told you right before it killed you. We carried what we always carried. Rifles, extra ammo, grenades, packs heavier than they had any right to be. Sweat soaked through everything, even when the air was cool. The smell stayed with you. Oil, mud, old smoke and fear you didn't admit to. That particular morning we were ordered to move fast and quiet. Rozvedka had flagged possible German withdrawal in the sector. That was the word passed down. Possible. That word also did a lot of damage. It made men relax just enough to get sloppy. The guide joined us near a crossroads that barely deserved the name. No uniform. Civilian clothes stiff with dirt. He didn't look at our faces, just our weapons. He nodded when spoken to, pointed down a narrow sunken lane and started walking like he'd done this 100 times before. The sergeant didn't like it. I could see it in his jaw, but the order came from higher up, and higher up wasn't walking point. The first rule of war is you don't get to choose all your risks. Sometimes they're handed to you, wrapped in authority, and you're told to trust them. So we stepped into that lane, hedgerows rising over our heads like walls, and let a stranger lead us forward. At first it felt like any other movement we'd done since coming ashore. Slow, careful, eyes scanning the tops of the hedgerows and the gaps between roots. The lane was barely wide enough for 2 men abreast, and the mud sucked at our boots with every step. The guide stayed 10 yards ahead, never looking back, just tapping the dirt with a stick when he wanted us to turn. We moved by hand signals. Stop, spread, close up. The kind of quiet coordination you only get after weeks of watching the same men breathe and flinch. Safety catches came off without anyone saying a word. Someone tripped once, caught himself and froze, waiting for the crack of a rifle that never came. That's when the training started to feel thin. In exercises back in England, lanes like this were textbook choke points. You learned to avoid them or clear them hard. Here we were doing neither. We were threading ourselves through like wire through a needle, trusting that the other end wasn't rigged to explode. The guide turned us off the lane and into a field bordered by thicker hedges. He hesitated for the first time, just a second, long enough for me to notice, long enough for my stomach to knot. He wiped his hands on his trousers and kept moving. We took a knee, while the sergeant moved up to whisper with the lieutenant. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw the look, confusion mixed with urgency. The guide was pointing now, more insistently, toward a break in the hedgerow that looked too clean, too intentional. I remember thinking how quiet it was. No birds, no farm sounds. Even the distant artillery had gone still. Normandy had learned how to listen better than we had. Our point man edged forward, rifle up, breathing slow. The rest of us followed, spacing tight whether we liked it or not. That's when it hit me that this wasn't how a withdrawal looked. No signs of hasty movement, no discarded gear, no broken ground, just waiting. Someone behind me muttered that this felt wrong. The sergeant snapped a hand back, fist tight, silence. Orders were orders. We'd already committed. Turning around now would mean admitting we didn't trust the plan. And in war, admitting doubt at the wrong moment can be just as dangerous as the enemy. We crossed into the field anyway, unaware that the real test hadn't started yet. It was the guide who finally broke the rhythm. He stopped near the edge of the field and raised his hand, palm flat. Not a signal we'd taught him, just a gesture. The lieutenant moved up again, low and quick, and the two of them spoke in short bursts I couldn't understand. French, I assumed. Maybe something else. I didn't care about the language. I cared about the way the guide kept glancing back over his shoulder, toward the hedgerow we'd just passed through. That's when the older corporal leaned in close to me. He'd been in since the first wave, face permanently grey with exhaustion. Without moving his lips, he whispered, "In this war, what they don't explain will kill you faster than what they do." I didn't answer. I didn't have anything smart to say. All I could think about was how exposed we were, standing in a field that offered no cover beyond dirt and prayer. The guide pointed again, this time toward a narrow farm track cutting diagonally across the field. According to the map, that track shouldn't have existed. The lieutenant hesitated. I saw him look down, then back up, weighing the paper in his hand against the man in front of him. Radio traffic crackled softly behind us. Battalion wanted progress. Time mattered. Everything always mattered except the men walking point. The guide said something sharper this time. His voice rose just enough to carry urgency or panic. It was hard to tell the difference when you didn't know the words. That's when the sergeant pulled the lieutenant aside. I caught fragments. Too clean. No signs. "This smells wrong," the lieutenant nodded, but his eyes kept drifting back to the guide. He was stuck between doubt and authority usually won. We were ordered to reform and move toward the track. As we closed in, I noticed details that hadn't stood out before. The grass near the hedgerow was pressed down, not trampled, but flattened evenly. The dirt by the track showed marks that weren't from carts or boots. Too regular, too deliberate. The guide avoided looking at us now. He walked faster, like distance might protect him. Something about that told me this wasn't just a shortcut gone bad. This felt planned, not necessarily by him, but around him. And for the first time since we'd left the beach, I understood that the enemy didn't always announce himself with gunfire. Sometimes he just waited for you to follow the wrong man. Orders came down to tighten the formation. No spacing, too much ground we couldn't see. That alone told me how serious it had gotten. When officers start breaking their own safety rules, it's usually because they feel the clock breathing down their necks. I'd been shifted forward in the column by then, close enough to hear the lieutenant's radio exchanges in clipped whispers. Battalion wanted confirmation on enemy movement beyond the next hedgerow. We were the ones supposed to provide it. No artillery prep, no armor, just us and whatever waited on the other side. The guide was kept close now, boxed in by two riflemen, not for his protection, for ours. He didn't protest. That worried me more than if he had. We reached a low stone wall near the track and took cover. The lieutenant crawled up beside me and another man, peering over with his binoculars. I remember the smell of the stone, cold, damp, old, older than any of us. It had been there long before the war and would probably still be there after, no matter who died next to it. The field beyond dipped slightly, then rose into another hedgerow line, thicker than the last. Perfect ground for an ambush. Everyone could see it. Nobody said it. The guide murmured something and pointed to a narrow gap dead center in the hedge. A natural passage, he claimed. That's what the lieutenant translated. Natural things don't have edges that clean. I was tasked to move with the lead element to check it. No ceremony, no build-up. Just a nod and a hand signal. I felt the weight of my gear shift as I stood, the strap biting into my shoulder. This was the line you crossed when observation turned into commitment. As we advanced, I realized we'd crossed an invisible boundary. Radios went quiet. Even the guide stopped talking. The world narrowed to the hedge in front of us and the space between heartbeats. We were close enough now that I could see into the gap. Too dark, too still. That was when I understood. Whatever was waiting ahead had been waiting for a while, and we'd walked straight into it. The first shot didn't sound like it came from anywhere specific. That's what made it worse. Just a sharp crack that snapped the air, followed by the wet thud of a man going down somewhere to my left. No scream, just weight hitting dirt. Then the field came alive. Machine gun fire tore through the hedgerow line ahead of us, low and disciplined, stitched at chest height like someone had measured us in advance. We dropped hard, hugging the ground, trying to make ourselves smaller than bullets. Dirt kicked up into my mouth. I tasted iron and earth and something burnt. The radio erupted behind us, shouting, call signs, someone yelling for smoke, someone else yelling that the smoke was landing short. German voices carried over the gunfire, calm, controlled. They weren't surprised. They'd been waiting. The lieutenant was shouting into the handset, trying to get grid coordinates through, but the line was a mess, static, overlapping calls. Battalion wanted confirmation. We were giving them confirmation the hard way. I saw the guide pressed flat against the ground, hands over his head. He was crying, full body shaking. Whatever role he'd played in this, planned or forced, it had ended the moment the shooting started. That didn't make any of us safer. Our sergeant crawled up, blood running down the side of his face from a cut he didn't even notice. He yelled orders straight into our ears. Return fire. Short bursts. Don't waste ammo. The hedge swallowed our rounds without complaint. Runner tried to move back toward the wall. He made it 3 steps before a burst caught him mid-stride. He spun and dropped, legs folding wrong. Nobody went for him. Not because we didn't care, because caring doesn't stop bullets. That's when it became clear. This wasn't a random ambush. The fields, the gap, the timing, it was all too clean. They knew exactly where we'd come from and where we'd be forced to go. We hadn't just trusted the wrong guide. We'd been delivered. Pinned to the dirt, I finally understood how completely boxed in we were. The machine guns weren't the worst part. It was the mortars. You could hear them leave the tube, thump, then that half-second of empty space before the ground answered back. The first round landed behind us, right where the lane funneled in, cutting off retreat, clean, professional. The lieutenant crawled over, face pale, shouting straight into the radio that we were trapped in a pre-sighted kill zone. His voice cracked when he said it, like admitting it made it real. Command wanted him to push through, break contact forward. There was no forward, just more hedgerow, more fire. That's when the guide started yelling. Not French this time, broken English, fast, desperate. He kept pointing behind the hedge, screaming about Germans already there before dawn, about being told where to stand, what to say, about his family. His voice disappeared under another mortar blast, but the message was clear enough. He hadn't led us into danger by mistake. He'd been used. The sergeant made the call. He didn't wait for permission. Smoke grenades out front, not to advance, but to blind them long enough to shift sideways, not retreat, lateral movement. The kind of move you only try when staying still means dying for sure. I was told to cover the guide. That order hit harder than any explosion. I remember staring at him, mud-covered, sobbing, useless, and thinking about the men already bleeding out behind us. The easy choice would have been to leave him. Plenty of guys would have. Nobody would have said a word. But orders are orders. I dragged him with one hand and fired with the other. Blind shots into the hedge while smoke swallowed the field. Someone screamed for a medic. Someone else stopped screaming altogether. As we crawled, I saw shapes moving in the smoke. German helmets. Close. Too close. They weren't rushing. They didn't have to. They thought they had us finished. That's when I realized something that stayed with me ever since. We weren't meant to escape that field, and the only reason any of us did was because one bad plan collided with another, and for a few seconds chaos favored us instead of them. We broke contact the ugly way. No clean withdrawal, no line formation. Just men moving when the fire lifted enough to let them breathe. The smoke did its job for about a minute, maybe less. Long enough to crawl, drag, stumble sideways into a fold in the ground the maps had never bothered to mark. When the firing finally slowed, it wasn't because the Germans stopped. It was because they'd lost sight of us and didn't want to rush blind. They didn't need to. They'd already done the damage. We regrouped behind another hedgerow, or what was left of one after the mortars chewed it apart. The platoon was in pieces, missing men, wounded men, faces I knew too well suddenly gone. The medic worked without looking up, hands red, voice steady like he was fixing an engine instead of trying to keep boys alive. The lieutenant got on the radio again. This time, command listened. Artillery finally came down where it should have in the first place, pounding the field we'd just escaped. Watching those shells land felt hollow. Too late doesn't stop meaning too late just because it's loud. Military police showed up before nightfall, not to help, to ask questions. The guide was taken away without ceremony, hands tied, eyes empty. I never saw him again. Whether he talked, disappeared, or got buried under paperwork and silence, I don't know. We were told to keep our mouths shut. Wrong intel, fog of war, enemy deception, phrases stacked on top of bodies until the truth was buried good and deep. No tribunal for us, no apology either. Just orders to move out the next morning like nothing had happened. The sergeant didn't make it through the night. The corporal who warned me never said another word about that field. He didn't have to. What stuck with me wasn't the ambush itself. It was how fast responsibility evaporated once the shooting stopped. How cleanly the blame slid downhill until it landed on the dead, who couldn't argue back. By dawn, Normandy looked quiet again, but we all knew better. We pushed on through Normandy after that, because that's what units do. They don't stop to process. They don't slow down so the living can catch up with the dead. The war kept moving, and we moved with it, carrying that field with us whether we wanted to or not. By the time Paris fell, half the faces from that hedgerow were gone. Some killed outright, some evacuated and never returned. A few broke in quieter ways, hands that wouldn't stop shaking, eyes that never quite focused again. Nobody called it trauma back then. You were either fit for duty or you weren't. And if you weren't, the war forgot you fast. I finished the war older than my years and emptier than I knew how to explain. When they shipped me home, people expected stories, hero stuff, victories. They wanted clean lines and clear reasons. I learned early which memories to keep locked away. Normandy made more sense to them as a headline than as a place where men bled into dirt because someone trusted the wrong voice. I tried to put it behind me, got a job, built a life. On paper, everything worked, but that field never stayed quiet in my head. Every time I heard someone say it'll be fine without knowing why, I was back there. Every time authority spoke with too much confidence and not enough proof, I felt the ground tighten under my boots. What haunted me wasn't just the ambush, it was the lesson underneath it. How easily decisions get made far from the people who pay for them. How trust, once given, becomes a weapon if it's aimed wrong. That guide, whether he was coerced or broken or just trying to survive, was only one link in a chain that ended with boys dying in a French field that didn't even make the maps. Years later, I learned that the Germans had done it before, used locals, forced routes, pre-sighted lanes. It was standard practice. Someone up the line should have known. Maybe they did. Maybe they decided the risk was acceptable. Acceptable is a strange word when you're the one lying in the mud, listening to your friend choke on his own blood. I don't talk about Normandy much, not because it hurts too much, but because it deserves honesty, and honesty makes people uncomfortable. War isn't just bullets and bravery. It's paperwork, assumptions, shortcuts, and the quiet understanding that when things go wrong, the truth rarely survives the cleanup. I survived that field. A lot of better men didn't, and that's something you don't ever really come home from. People love asking what it was like there's some clean answer that fits in a sentence, like I can hand them a picture they can hold without it burning their hands. Most of the time I just shrug, because the truth is, the part that stays with you isn't the shooting, it's everything around it. The decisions, the silences, the way a mistake can be dressed up as strategy after the fact. That day in Normandy taught me something I didn't want to learn so young. Trust is not the same as faith. Trust is earned and checked and questioned because the price of being wrong isn't embarrassment, it's graves. Faith is what they ask for when they don't want questions. And in the army there's always somebody who'd rather you believe than understand. We trusted the wrong guide, sure. That's the sentence people latch onto because it sounds simple, a tidy cause, a tidy blame. But the guide wasn't the whole story. He was the last step, the visible step, the part we could point at when it was over and say, there, that's what did it. The uglier truth is that it took a chain of choices to put us in that field. Pressure from above, impatience, a hunger to move fast, and the quiet arrogance that we could outsmart a country we barely understood. And then, when it went bad, the machine did what machines do. It protected itself. It smoothed the edges. It renamed the failure. Men who'd never smelled that dirt decided what mattered and what didn't. They filed their reports, they used their clean language, and they moved the map pins forward as if the ground hadn't swallowed people. I carried that with me longer than I carried my rifle. Sometimes I still see that lane when I close my eyes, the hedgerows like walls, the air too still, the guide walking ahead like the future had already been decided. I remember thinking we were taking the smart route. I remember the first man dropping without a sound. I remember smoke and confusion, and the way I grabbed that guide and hated him and needed him alive all at the same time, because answers don't come from corpses. If you want a lesson from me, it's not a heroic one, it's small and it's bitter. When someone tells you not to question, question anyway. When something feels wrong, say it out loud before it's too late to matter. And never assume the people making the plan will pay the price if it fails. Usually they won't. Usually the bill comes due in the mud, in the dark, with boys who haven't even learned how to be old yet. That's what Normandy gave me. Not pride, not glory. Just the understanding that some decisions don't end when the shooting stops. They echo for decades, and you spend the rest of your life trying to live around the sound.